I went in the military and started in intelligence, counterintelligence in the Air Force. Did that for almost 11 years. At the tail end of my career, started getting into cyber intelligence, which kind of opened this door for the CISO role. The military helped a lot in structure and organization, obviously, but I also think it helped in my ability working in intelligence and analyzing data and analyzing what motivated people to want to attack the U.S.
It's an interesting statement in that a lot of people think they know what motivates them, but really understanding what motivates people is difficult.
A lot of times people get so wrapped up in what they do for work that it becomes who they are. And then when something happens, they fall apart because that was everything to them. You would be blown away by the number of attacks we see on a daily basis just in a community college environment.
Hi everyone, this is Jocelyn Houle. I'm your host today with BetterTech. I'm really excited to welcome Jamie Spradlin, who is Vice Chancellor and CISO at Maricopa Community Colleges. Thank you for joining us, Jamie.
Thank you, Jocelyn, for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, the title of this show is Unorthodox Path to InfoSec Leadership. And I found this very interesting because I've worked my whole life in software and I've only recently started working with the security world. And so it's a totally new culture to me, and I'm very interested in understanding more about your perspective and what makes an unorthodox path.
Yes,
so lots to talk about. Before we get into it, though, just for our listeners, help understand your role as a vice chancellor. A lot of business users are listening in, and so maybe we don't know what that means. Tell us a little bit about your role.
So it's really a fluffy title. CISO is really my job and my role. So I work at Maricopa Community Colleges. We're a district with 10 independently accredited colleges. We see about 200,000 students a year. We have about 12,000 employees, faculty, and staff. We're the largest community college district in the U.S. So we have a pretty good breadth of experience and knowledge and exposure to our environment here in the Phoenix metro area.
Okay, now I have a college-age child. And, the role of community colleges has changed so much since I was a kid.
Yes,
Tell
ma'am.
us a little bit, what's going on in the modern giant community college like yours?
Yes. So there's a lot of unique opportunities that happen now within community colleges. So for one of our colleges, they provide pathways through cybersecurity where they have a security operations center on campus that they monitor local community governments that don't have IT staff. So it provides that level of hands-on experience after they get through their 2-year program, provides them real-world experience, and then there's job transformation after that, where they can work in the state government, they can work for Maricopa, gives them a lot of opportunities for career path and growth and development. There's a lot of specialized programs that we have that are 2-year programs. A lot of students nowadays do not seem to have the same desire as to go to 4-year universities like it was when we were coming up. I'm old, so I understand that the challenges are different and everybody wants to make money. So community colleges seem to be a better fit, and it's not just so much the HVAC and those that used to be. There's a lot more technical driven. We have nursing programs. We just started a couple 4-year bachelor degree programs as well. So there's a lot of opportunities in the community college, and it's significantly cheaper. Community college is way cheaper than it is for regular higher ed 4-year universities. So, and the opportunities to connect in the local area with businesses, internships and things like that. We have a lot of relationships across the community as well. So it's just a different path than non-traditional, I guess you would say. But, it's been very productive for our community and for our student population.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know a lot of my daughter's peers have thought about and have gone to community college 2-year programs, not only because of the cost, but because, the world is really changing. There's a lot more interest in more of a get working faster, get to know like a trade or something specific like nursing, which isn't a trade exactly, but something specific that, you can take to the world. So that's really interesting. You're really kind of at the front end of a big trend that matters, I think.
Yeah, we have dual enrollment as well. So we have a lot of high school kids that we have that take classes too. So that's another avenue where we've been able to plug into the local community to provide that kind of education at another level for them. So it's been interesting to see. I've only been here 6 months, so it's been an interesting learning curve for me as well.
Right, right. I have a million questions. It's got to be fun working with high school and college students.
Amazing.
They're kind of different, right?
A little bit, yes. It is, but it's fun. It's challenging. They keep you on your toes, I guess is the best way of putting it.
I imagine that's true, particularly from a cyber perspective with all the new AI and concerns about not just cyber, but also like, what's that called? Like, just fair use of materials,
Yeah.
right? I'm sure is a big
Yes.
debate we can get into. But before we do, you mentioned you've been there for 6 months. Can I ask
Mhm.
a little bit about, just high level, like what's your path been into Mariposa, but also, it's just the cyber world in general?
Sure. Yeah. So, the reason why it's unorthodox is because I went in the military, uh, and started in intelligence, counterintelligence in the Air Force. Did that for almost 11 years. At the tail end of my career, started getting into cyber intelligence, which kind of opened this door for the CISO role. During that time, I then transitioned over to government contracting work and worked on that path, working cyber intelligence, which was really looking at foreign countries and what they were trying to do into the government networks and environments. After that point, I got into higher ed as a CISO. So I've always been in leadership positions, which is different because most people traditionally come up through the technology path. I didn't. I started out in leadership from the day one that I moved away from the military. So, and then I've been CISO at, healthcare, higher ed, local government and municipal governments like the city of Raleigh. And then I worked for, another big company for 4 years where I rolled out their cybersecurity program in the state of North Carolina prior to coming here to Maricopa. So it's been different in the sense that I didn't have the traditional training, education pathway that most people do in coming up through information technology as a whole.
Interesting. So coming out of the Air Force, what did you have? What do you think you had that was the like foundational to take you through these leadership roles?
I think military first ingrains you in the how to put the job before yourself, because they teach you that selfless leadership. And I think coming into the private sector after being in the military, I was so used to doing everything I could to achieve the mission that I really didn't think so much about me. And that's different in society as a whole, because a lot of times people were more in the approach of, I want to see what I can get out of it. I want to move up career wise. I want to make more money. And that was never my goal in this. It was always do the right thing, to better environments, to make sure we're better protected, and allow people to do their job much easier without the worries and constraints around security. Oftentimes, security is seen as the land of no, because we always want to tell people, no, you can't do that. But that's not the case. There's justification and reasons behind that, and there's ways to mitigate those risks. And I think given the opportunity to articulate and explain that to people, and that's where I've been able to have those conversations to business executives, not just the technology side. And I understand both sides of that language. Makes it easier to articulate and get things accomplished, and the buy-in from senior executives.
Interesting. We didn't do an intro. I didn't introduce myself, and we quickly pulled up before the interview. But like, I work in data and AI and have a finance background, and I would say that's really right. There are a lot of cyber organizations that are kind of, the rest of us feel like speed racers, and they feel like the traffic cop, right? They're shutting it down.
There is that, but there's reasons for it. I mean, the malicious actors that are out there, we would be blown away by the number of attacks we see on a daily basis just in a community college environment. So I think the problem that I believe has always been the case is that we're not able in security to articulate that message so people understand it at a user level. And I think having that ability to be able to communicate and water down some of that technical terminology that doesn't make sense to most people so they understand how they are impacted and what this does for them, not what it's doing to prohibit them from getting something done.
Tell me, can you share maybe an example of a time that you had to do that, maybe with a people do want to know the answer and they do really respond to the rationale, but I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but sometimes people aren't on your side.
Yeah. No, it's common. It's because they see this as an encumbrance to them getting their job done, and they're comfortable doing what they've been doing for the last 20 years. So when you come in and you look at an organization, you're like, we need to change the way we do processes because we need to move to automation, or we need to accelerate our workflows. It's uncomfortable for people because you're asking them to change. And I've learned through the last 20 years that a lot of people are comfortable with the idea of change, but not the implementation of change. Because then they have to change those pushing 2 buttons. Now they have to push 4. And that's a big difference for them. So I think it becomes, we've become complacent in a lot of ways. And then we've put in technical controls that people don't understand. So I think if you get out and you're able to message it and communicate it ahead of time before you get to the point where you're going to implement things, I think it's easier for people to understand and digest, and they're willing to buy into the process.
So if there's somebody new out there in like a CISO leadership position, I like this idea of communicating early and often, but like tactically, what are some ways that you've done that you find are more successful?
So there's opportunities within my environment, having the 10 independently accredited colleges, where I can go out and meet with them independently and have what we would call like road shows or meet and greets. So you get out and engage with the community and then ask the questions and be there so they understand there's not this guy sitting at the district office that's unrelatable, doesn't understand our unique business needs, doesn't know where we're at and what we're doing on a daily basis. Because you have 10 colleges that have primary business needs that are different across all 10. So getting out and talking to the technology people and also the business people. So I understand what drives you, what motivates you, how are you able to get your job done, what influences you to get your job done, and listening. Because people don't want you to talk. They want you to listen and understand their perspective. And if you're able to take all that back, formulate a plan, and then communicate that out, where you're including both the technology and the business side, I think it becomes a lot more palatable for people to digest and be able to implement moving forward.
Yeah, two
But
things.
it's communication.
Yeah, I mean, everyone says communication, but like, what does it mean?
Right.
And what I want to highlight from what you're saying is, you often hear people just say like, hey, just walk around and talk to people and be in person. Well, you're sort of saying that, but you're also saying something a bit more structured, which I've seen really powerfully work, which is, I used to call it kind of the good news show, to help people just sort of level set on a very, steady drumbeat. This change is coming. It's still coming. Almost here. To kind of do, I love that.
Step it.
Yeah, baby step it. And, to you live with it every day. So you feel like, gosh, this is repetitive. But to the person who doesn't, right? You're like, yeah, you did talk about that 2 months ago. So they can start. I don't know. There's probably a stat behind this that I'm not remembering. It takes people a long time to digest what you're saying sometimes.
And I think also the point of it's not the message sent, it's the message received. And I think we get so hung up on what we're saying to people and want them to buy into it, but we're not understanding how they understand that and interpret that moving forward. So I think you've got to be transparent, open, and honest. And I think a lot of people say things like that, but they're not genuinely, truly transparent and honest about the objectives and the goals and what you're trying to do as an organization. So I think that you're able to show that not one time, not 2 times, but consistently across your messaging, whether it's in person, through video, through communications, whatever that looks like, as long as your message is consistent with what you're trying to achieve and you're transparent about what your goals are, I think it's easier for people to get on board and say, okay, at least they're being honest. It might not be what's going to make my life easier from a work perspective, but I understand why they're doing what they're doing. And I think that oftentimes people just need to understand that why.
Yeah, I think people will come with you, even if the truth is unpalatable. They'll come with you if they hear it. And I just,
Yes, ma'am.
it's interesting what you're saying too about understanding what motivates people. I'd love to just kind of focus in on that for a second, because it's actually it's an interesting statement in that a lot of people think they know what motivates them, but really understanding what motivates people is difficult. I used to work with a lot of people who investigate fraud, and it turns out like they get in trouble if they don't investigate certain things within a certain timeline. But like, I didn't learn that for almost 2 years, because like to them it's bread and butter. They don't know that I don't. So do you think your military background maybe helps you like really hone in maybe on like the narrative a little bit more, or do you have a way of thinking about how do you find out what really motivates people?
I think the military helped a lot in structure and organization, obviously. But I also think it helped in my ability working in intelligence and analyzing data and analyzing what motivated people to want to attack the U.S. things like
Let me
that.
pause
So
you
I
for a
had to
second.
understand.
Let me tell us a little bit about like what does that really mean, and like break it down a little bit. Like what were you
So
doing?
so I would look at information that was coming in from multiple feeds across the world. We would analyze that and try to figure out intent, which is hard to understand because understanding intent takes a lot. There's a lot of variables that go into play with that. So I think part of that understanding intent and trying to get to that point so you could predict where they were going next. What was their next move? How are they going to accomplish this? Who are they working with? How are they being funded? All those things come into play. So you really had to understand contextually the whole landscape and try to be able to say, okay, I'm going to forecast this is what's going to happen. And that's really difficult. But I think translating that into cyber is this context of understanding people and being able to read people in their environment and understanding how they work and what motivates them and what discourages them. So I think for me, it's been really beneficial in the sense that I understand people. And I think that's the first thing. Put technology, everything else aside. If you can relate to people one-on-one and you can have those conversations, they're going to trust you. They're going to respect the decisions you make and they're going to be willing to work with you. So I think that takes time. I think there's a lot of effort, energy that goes into that development of having those relationships with people, but they have to be genuine. They can't be superficial. And I think a lot of times when you're in leadership, people see them as there's a huge gap between that person and what I do. So I try to bridge the gap and say, no, we're all on the same team. I'm not successful unless you're successful, and you can't be successful unless I give you the opportunities to be successful. So there's so many things that go into play. But I think really taking the time to understand people and how they function and what motivates them and what doesn't.
I love that. Going a step deeper with the full context is your example from the national intelligence side, because I think when you're working in a very large, complex organization, those skills do come in that really help you understand people's context because they may not be able to express it to you directly in words. But particularly like where's the money coming from? Who gets fired? Under what circumstances? Like simple things like that. It takes extra time to go that step deeper, and it's a bit of a skill set all by itself. But I think that's it's well worth it when you're trying to influence people. Yeah.
And technology people just really don't like to talk. Like they're very closed out. They like to do their functions. Like give me my job, let me sit in the corner and do my job. So it's challenging in technology to do that because I'm different in the sense that I'm very active. I'm outgoing. I want to talk to people, engage people, and understand how they work and how they function. But most technology people are like, why is he asking me questions? What does he want to really know? Why are we so it's different in that context because they've never had people come up and genuinely want to understand their role and how they impact the organization as a whole.
Well, everyone's always mad at them for some reason.
Yeah, seems that way. Yes.
Everyone's always mad at them. No, it's really interesting. A lot of people, don't transition very well from the military into the private sector. And, one reason is, I think you're more outgoing, can help.
Right.
Do you think, did you have to build your muscle for, like sort of unstructured craziness that like the regular world has?
No, I think it's just who I am as a person. I think I defaulted to the military when I went to college and I wasn't successful in college out of high school. So I went and said, I need something that's going to help me be more structured, that's going to give me some education and training. And that's why I defaulted to the military. I had grandfathers, both my grandfathers were in the military. So it was already there in the back of my mind, but it wasn't something I thought of doing until I actually joined. So, but the military gave me so many opportunities. I traveled the world. They paid for my bachelor's degree. Like they did a lot of things for me that I probably would have taken me a lot longer independently to do on my own, but also gave me this leadership training that in society as a whole, we just don't do very well anymore. I'm accountable to the process, not to what society thinks I should do. So, and the integrity associated with that to know that regardless of what's going on, whether someone's looking, watching, it doesn't matter. I'm going to do the right thing regardless. And I think that's different too. And when people that work for you, that work around you, see you holding yourself to that level, it raises their level. And then that trust factor starts to become closer and closer over time.
Yeah, it's interesting you mention that because people are used to being a much more transactional kind of environment.
Mm-hmm.
And I just get on my soapbox. I think, working in tech, as long we really put a high value on technical skills, but we really don't train managers and leaders. The better you are at tech, the higher you rise, and they give you more and more direct reports, but it may not even be the thing you want to do.
It is very transactional. You're right.
Interesting. But the other thing I kind of like about this is there's something about your perspective, something that's special about your perspective where you're like, yeah, I can definitely do this outside of the military context. What if there's somebody listening right now? Maybe they're not even in the military. Maybe they're just doing something else. And they're, I think a lot of times people sort of sit back and think, oh, I can't do this thing. What would your advice be, or like, what do you think is your special perspective? I know the military is part of it, but there's something special about launching yourself into a new world.
I think there's, you have to be self-motivated. You have to understand your strengths and weaknesses and be honest about what those are. Educate yourself in your weak areas. Try to improve those areas and just be confident that you're able to do the job. I think oftentimes we get so weighted down by what social media says or the influences we have external to what we do in our job just on a daily basis. And if you get singularly focused on what everybody else thinks and what people are saying, the noise, the white noise, as you alluded to earlier, it just becomes something that you're just like, I don't have the motivation. And you got to have the stamina, the perseverance, and the patience to say, this is where I'm going in 5 years. And I'm going to get there. And it might change because your path isn't always straight, but you have to stay dedicated and committed to what your objectives are and where you want to go in life. And I think if you're willing to do that and you're strong-willed enough to know, I'm going to get there. And I know people are going to be there to detract and encourage, but how do we get there? How do I get there while also motivating people around me and bringing people alongside to mentor, to develop, to build relationships with, to have a community that supports you in what you're doing? As you go through this process, whether it's in education circles where you've had work groups and things like that, or it's community activities and events. There's a lot of programs that are out there associated with technology that you can join groups and things like that help encourage you from a technology perspective. So there's a lot of different ways. It's just, I think it comes down to the person. You have to be willing to say, because people told me when I came out of the military, you're never going to do this. You're not going to be able to do this. Okay, fine. That's a challenge to me. I didn't take it as a deterrent and say, okay, you're right. I'm not. So I'm going to do something else. I said that motivated me. And I'm like, all right, let's figure this out. I'm going to figure out a way to do this. And that's what I've been doing ever since. And that's why my path is unorthodox, because I don't have certifications, which blows people away. I have 0 certifications in cyber. And yet I sit at the top of our chain doing this job every day, and people have no clue that I don't, because I know that relating to people is the most important thing I got to do. And if I can do that and motivate them and encourage them to do their job, we're all going to be successful. And that's my role, is to do that.
I do. Yeah. I love that perspective. And I kind of, this whole idea of, serving the mission rather than, some sort of like personal, professional, transactional goal. I think that's really powerful. And I've seen it at work. I've seen it work really well. Couple of questions. I think people who are kind of underrepresented and certainly in the cyber and software world, sometimes it's hard to get noticed when you are, that's also part of it. I think, how do you kind of balance being I don't know, is this like servant leader type of, persona? How do you balance that with getting the credit for your team and kind of, making sure that people perhaps who aren't getting seen do get seen?
I think that timing is a big part of that, like everything in life. I think you're going to land in places and you're going to get roles that you might not have thought you would ever do, or work for people you might not. And there might be relationships that come out of that. The job might have been horrible, but you've spent 2 years with a couple of people, and you move on, they move on. But 10 years later, you might reconnect, because cyber is so small and we're all interconnected. Regardless of the vertical we work in, we're all connected in different ways because we all cross paths at some point. And I think keeping that open mind associated with that, and knowing that, you know what, this is part of my path. It's not the end of my path, and working towards what you feel is in the best interest of you, that you can also benefit the organization that you're working for.
I
think
like that.
timing's huge.
Suffering can help.
Yes.
You can suffering together can help. I remember having a terrible demo once, and I got yelled at so hard by one of our biggest bosses that other people were nice to me after that.
I think that's where perseverance and patience comes in. Like you got to know there's going to be bumps, there's going to be roadblocks, and you just got to be willing to say, I'm going to power through those and know that that's okay. And I'm going to learn from those, good and bad, and press on and do better the next time, and have that confidence internally that you're like, okay, I got this and I can do this.
Yeah, I want to talk more about cyber, but before that, it's interesting. You work with a lot of young people. There's a lot of debate around, how do you keep younger people on your teams? I don't happen to buy into this because I have kids this age, but Gen Z is not as open to feedback.
Right.
And you're talking about taking feedback, right? And if I can offer it more of a military way of just kind of taking it, right? It's like, okay, very direct, probably. But the private sector is different. People take their feedback differently. Was that an adjustment for you?
I think what I learned in the military, it's not about the person, it's about the mission. So I think when you move into public sector, private sector, you get outside of the military framework, you have to understand it's about the job, not who you are as a person. And you got to be able to separate those two. A lot of times people get so wrapped up in what they do for work that it becomes who they are. And then when something happens, they fall apart because that was everything to them. And I think that's where I've learned to balance and keep a focus on my job is during the day. And I do that. I'm on call 24/7, but I try to separate that and enjoy my downtime outside of that and be able to decompress and not allow it to occupy all my time. So I think there has to be some semblance of that as a professional and as a human being, that you got to be able to separate the two and know that it's not about who you are as a person. It's about what you're doing as a job and that function. Be committed to it, do the best you can. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to walk away from that and say, okay, I need some downtime, just decompress from this. And whatever that looks like, hobbies, sports, TV, games, whatever that is for that person, but something to get away from it. So you're just, even if it's just brain fog, to not think about anything at that given time,
I think a lot of Gen Zers would agree with that perspective of keeping that balance. And so, that's when people complain about something, sometimes there's some truth there. So that's good. That's good. All right. Well, let's switch gears and talk a little bit about probably your favorite topic and mine. We can come back to it. I know I want to talk a little bit more about mentoring and you have 6 principles that you like to talk about, right? We're going to come back to that as kind of our wrap up. But, let's talk a little bit about cyber and your environment, right?
Yes.
You said, you're seeing different, like, what are you seeing from the cyber perspective in terms of threats, volume, difficulty to identify, difficulty to remediate? Like, what are you seeing that's new or different? Give us a picture of it.
So in higher ed, you have what we would consist of a production environment, which is where everybody works and maintains that environment. Then you have the guest environment, which is essentially where all your students are and anybody that comes on campus that needs access to Wi-Fi, things like that. So it's separate networks. So the avenue of attack for people, hackers, people that have malicious intent is so broad in higher ed because you want to leave it open on the guest side for students because you want the academic freedom and making sure they're able to do all the things they need to do and research things which can go anywhere. On the faculty and staff side, it's a little more structured and tightened because we control that because it's our data and we only want them to have access to certain things. So it's really, you got 2 separate things that you're working on at the same time. So, but I think it's a matter of, again, it goes back to communicating and having people buy into the process of what you're trying to do and why you're putting these controls in place. So I think your student population really doesn't care about any controls. They just want to be able to do what they need to do and get on whenever they want to, which is fair. But I think there's still a role that security plays in that environment, and they don't care to understand it, and they want it to be as least intrusive as possible so they can do anything they want on the student side. Faculty and staff side is a little different. It's more structured and organized and controlled because you want to make sure that the data they're ingesting is our data AI plays a huge role in this, as we've discussed previously, and it's going to continue to grow and develop, because are you talking to a person or are you talking to an AI bot? What is actually that interaction with? And now it's hard to discern and differentiate between what is real and what's not. So it's just taking this up to another level. So now you have a lot of security and technology tools that are integrating AI into their environments. But the problem that I see from an AI perspective is a lot of times when you interact with the AI, it's whatever you put in, that's what you're going to get back out. So if you feed it misinformation continually, you're going to start getting misinformation back when it responds back to you. So I think that's part of the scary part on the student side, because they don't realize that. They just think if I put something in, it's going to tell me the truth. Well, it's not really the truth based on the environment you're doing that with. So there's a lot of variables.
No, I think people forget it's not deterministic. So like once
Yes,
you put it in,
100%. Yes.
once you put the cream in the coffee, you can't
Yes.
get back to
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's not a lot of education around AI. I think there's a lot of thoughts, and people have good interpretations of what they think and believe it is, but genuine, because I think we went so fast, so quick. It's kind of where we went from dial up to where we have internet today. It was such a huge leap, and everybody was it was easier transition. Now you got AI, and then we have quantum computing that's coming down the road. I mean, that's going to blow people away where that's going to go. So
I have a lot of like midnight anxieties because it's just going so fast. I can't even stay on top of it. Yeah. I'm reading everything, and it's like you're not picking up because there's like one jaw-dropping change after the next. And I think particularly I talk to a lot of cyber folks who are, just phishing in general, just leveled up so much in the last 6 months.
Because they generate the bots. They generate those bots that are just hitting you constantly because they don't have to sit there and manually do it anymore.
Yeah.
The messages that
just in case people aren't familiar, that's denial of service, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's constant, it's persistent, and it doesn't take but one person, because once one person clicks on something that allows an attacker to come into your environment, the lateral movement, meaning you can go across the environment, because once you have access in, it's unabated. You can go almost anywhere in most environments, and that's the scary part that people don't realize. Clicking on something, what the ramifications of that are. Most people don't want to do security awareness training because it's like, it's dry, it's boring, I don't want to do this.
It's tricky. I've been in this business for 25 years, and right. I get 2,000 emails a day.
Yes.
It's sort of tricky.
It is. And then you have the internal phishing campaigns where you're trying to see if people will click on stuff and then re-educate them. So then you get to the point where people become, I'm not going to open anything unless I'm sure that's the person that I'm talking to. And that's, right. I mean, there's got to be a balance. And I think from an education perspective, that's a whole nother component of this. From a cyber side, it's difficult. It's challenging. And keeping people up to speed on what is current and active in the environment is hard too, because that changes. Like you said, the speed of technology is just moving so quick, and trying to stay on the forefront of it is difficult when it comes to controls and education.
Well, I don't want to get you in trouble, so you can answer this question after we stop recording, but I'm curious to know who's better about not clicking on phishing scams, faculty or students?
Honestly, I would say it's about 50-50. Students sometimes are really good about it, but I mean, our population, we have 200,000 students we see in 12 months. I mean, that's a huge population of students. So the threat landscape is huge with them. Our faculty is a much smaller intentional group, so that the threat is not as big, but it's about 50-50 because vendors hit faculty, they don't hit students. And vendors, I have an idea, I got this. So once you get one or two of those going through to somebody, people are watching it. And then they start hitting you with those phishing emails, and then faculty click on it not knowing that it's anything malicious, which is fair. I mean,
oh yeah, absolutely. It's easy to do, actually. I have a lot of, it's pretty easy. With AI, sort of leveling up cyber, like it's definitely gonna, I think in business, I know they're going to have to spend more money on cyber. I know in education, probably they're looking to, really hold the line, right? On spending. Like, what do you think? You're the vice chancellor, but you're probably a vice chancellor of the whole college. What should that to be thinking about for the next 2, 5, 7 years in terms of like percent of budget for cyber?
It's always a tricky thing because people don't usually invest as organizations until something happens negatively. And then they're like, oh, wait, we got to do more in cyber. And then when it's quiet and there's nothing going on, the budgets start to slowly trickle back off. So I think it's a matter of the constant dialogue and interaction with your board, with your presidents, your chancellors, whoever that is, or your CEOs. And so they understand that there's a continual threat landscape that continues to change and evolve, and we got to stay at the forefront of it. How do we stay at the forefront of it? Doesn't mean we have the tools that we have today. We might need a different tool 2 years from now to help mitigate that risk so we don't see it from a proactive stance. A lot of organizations are very content with a reactive state or reactive posture when it comes to cybersecurity. And that doesn't do any good because they're already in your environment then. So I think organizations need to understand and businesses have to understand you got to be much more proactive and start looking ahead. We were looking at AI 3 years ago and how we get ahead of it. It's been evolving for the last 20 years, but how do you get ahead in front of that? And it's really difficult, but there are tools and mechanisms that are out there that are helping us reduce that noise so it's not such a wide range of noise from a technology perspective, but we're able to narrow that scope for us. It's never going to be 100%, but I think the communication will keep, and we'll say this every 2 words on here. I keep saying communication because it's so important and so powerful on how we do our business and making sure the buy-in is consistent across the entire organization.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, a lot of people I interview do talk about communication and leadership, but, kind of packed into what you're saying, I think are some tactical measures that people could pull out of this because I think what I'm hearing from you is really a lot. It's not just, hey, I got to communicate. I think a lot of people are like, check, I communicated, see you in 6 months.
Right. No.
And what I'm hearing from you is very steady drumbeat in terms of what has happened, what's about to happen, and it takes a lot of work in leadership to do that. How much time do you think you spend just communicating the standard things, not just like emergencies or weird stuff, but how much of your time would you say total, like 20%?
No, it's probably 75, 80%. I mean, it's a lot because at my level in the role in the organization, my job is to make sure everyone across the 10 colleges and the district understand where we're going and how we're getting there. So my job is constantly, I'm not pushing the buttons. I have teams that do that stuff to support that, but I'm out there saying, this is where we're at. This is where we need to go. And this is how we're going to get there. Developing roadmaps and strategies, long-term solutions, not just tactically today what we're doing. So let's think 3 years from now and work back how we're going to get there and develop that kind of. So then it also puts from a budgetary perspective and a resource allocation perspective, you're able to show this to leadership and say, this is where we're going. This is what we're going to need resource-wise, fiscally, what we're going to need. And I think if you're clear and honest about that, I think it helps move the needle for you as an organization because you're having that constant dialogue with them and being very transparent. Like I said earlier, like you've got to be honest about your situation. And I think sometimes CISOs and security officers aren't very transparent because that shows the risk to the environment that maybe they're not doing their job. And it's not about that. We got to be honest to fix it at the beginning and realize that we've made mistakes and we have missteps in what we've done from an implementation of a program. But I think realizing and being honest is huge.
And I think that might come from your military background. I knew a person in the military whose job was to analyze when something went really wrong, like a plane crashed or something bad.
Right.
And they were actually kind of graded on how harshly honest they could be because you're trying to save people's lives. And on the other end of the spectrum in the business world, I do think we have a little bit too much emphasis on the good news report. Everybody wants to, they just want to hear it's going great. And that emphasis, like for leaders, like, so at your level, but even above that, right? I think like leadership has to make it okay or even reward very direct.
Right. I think the senior leadership level, the ones above me, like the COO, the chancellor, our provost, like they need to understand what the landscape looks like, what our threat landscape looks like. And I have to be able to convince them that this is where we need to go. And then on top of that, I need their buy-in and their support, not just to me, but as the community as a whole, and making sure they're advocating on my behalf and the organization's behalf or doing from a security perspective. I think that's huge. So if you don't have that senior leadership buy-in and they're not willing to stand up and advocate on your behalf, it's really hard to move a program anywhere.
And they have to trust you, which is kind of back to that transparency business, right? Because if you're just like thumbs up, everything's great, and then they get burned because they're really the ones in the hot seat, then it's hard to build that real relationship and that real influence, because they're going to always be a little hesitant. So even though it's hard to tell the truth, or sometimes, I think I think that's a big part of getting that executive buy-in is to, say it how it really is. And it's a two-way street. Leaders have to allow it. But but I know that you have thought a little bit about this. I didn't want to step over it. In the notes here, I see that you have thought about this in 6 pillars. Is that right? Am I getting that mixed up?
I don't. Yeah, sure. I don't know that I said.
Have we touched that? I guess let me ask it a different way. Is there anything I haven't asked about your unorthodox path that I should have asked?
I think the big thing is what I would say to people that are interested, that are thinking about whether this is a career path or not. Cyber is evolving and it's going to continue to evolve, and we're going to need smart people that do things that we never thought we'd need to do in cyber moving forward. We need those technically smart people. We need those business people with strong business acumen and how they accomplish things, project management perspective, and understanding how you got to relate to people, because people are the beginning and the end of everything we do. And if you're not able to have those relationships established, understanding they're professional and business, but you got to have those and be able to have those honest conversations and be true with yourself. I think at the end of the day, the hardest person on me is me, because I hold myself to such a high standard. It's probably never going to be attainable because it's so high. But as long as I keep doing that and holding myself to that level, I'm going to exceed the expectations of those around me, the leadership that supports me. But I think at the end of the day, trust your skills, trust who you are as a person, be honest with yourself, encourage you to fix the weaknesses, go out and get education, training, whatever those look like, to strengthen those and keep building on the strengths you have in your personality and in your technical acumen.
In terms of technical acumen and building your credibility, right? Technically, I agree. I've been around this business a long time. Like, certifications have a role, and certain role, definitely don't want to take anything away from it, but I don't think it's the only indicator of technical capabilities. But we work in a tech business, and people, we have, every engineer plays this game, right? I'm like, well, what about that? And to a certain extent, you have to be ready for that.
Yes.
How you gotta be ready to play the what about this game?
Yes.
How do you do that?
I think experience has done it. I think I've surrounded myself with really smart technical people and just tried to absorb as much as I can, like a sponge, off of them. When I look to hire people that are smarter than me. I want them to be able to push the organization to move us forward. And then you got to be willing to listen, regardless of what level you're at. And I think sometimes we get complacent as we move up in organizations, that we're comfortable with what we know and what we can do. We just kind of sit there and kind of on cruise control. And I think once you get to that point, you're complacent and you're not benefiting the organization. So I think I put a lot of people around me that I don't even understand half the stuff they say to me the first 6 months, because they're talking all this technical stuff and I don't know the inner workings of engineering behind the scenes and how they get these done, the hashes and things like that. But the more I sit and listen to them, the more I understand a holistic view of how it plays a role in what I'm trying to accomplish. And then I'm able to formulate a better plan because I understand the intricacies associated with what we're trying to accomplish.
I think a lot of leaders have a hard time questioning what they think they know.
Oh yeah, 100%. Because they're vulnerable then. Because then they see themselves, oh, I got a chink in my armor. Like I don't want to expose that, because if they find that out, maybe they won't trust me. Maybe they won't think I can do the job. I've never agreed with that philosophy, which I think is part of why I'm where I am today, because I've chosen just to say, look, this is who I am. I'm honest about my abilities and skills, and I want to learn, and I'm going to continue to learn. And that's why I always encourage more technically sound people, smarter people to work on my team so I can learn from them, because it's a two-way street, as you said.
Do you have like a mental process where you're like, I definitely know this, that you stop yourself like, oh, do I know that? Did you have like a green and red flag system inside yourself?
I think a lot of times I feel like I never fully understand. Like because it moves so, like you said earlier, like it moves so fast. So it's an iterative, evolving process that's continually growing and changing. So I don't want to ever get to the point where I feel like I'm good on everything, because then I feel like I'm not learning. And I think that's all we do in life is learn. And if you're not learning, you're dying, essentially. And I think that that's a big part of it, is just, it goes back to being honest with yourself and honest with what you can and can't do. And
you talk about vulnerability too. It's so interesting from a military background to be talking about these kind of very interpersonal, vulnerable, maybe you're not the smartest, you're the most educated person in the room, or you're not getting all the accolades. It's kind of an interesting, you wouldn't expect that maybe. And,
it's fair. Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. But I think there's a balance to that. I think there's the other aspect of, I grew up in such a team environment where no one person was it. Like, we did this collectively as a group. And if we collectively did our part in pieces, then we moved together collectively. And I think I've translated that to what I do in public sector now, is like, I don't know everything. So I hire smarter people that can come in and do those functions so we can move as an organization. But if I can't provide the resources, the funding, the tools, the solutions my teams need, we're never going to move in that direction. So I think the constant of, we're a team, and getting them to buy into the team concept and understanding that each of their roles is unique and specific, but it also is very important to us moving the needle. And I also have a different philosophy than most when it comes to the team members. We follow NIST CSF, which is a framework that's out there. And there's 6 guiding principles that are associated with it. What I've done with my team is we have 6 people on the security operations side of the house. Each of them right now serves a role in those 6 areas of NIST CSF. But a year from now, I'm rotating them, because I feel like a lot of times what we get in technology is we get people so focused on a single technology tool or solution, and they don't have the breadth and understanding of how I can learn different things. So I'm going to make them uncomfortable in a year, and they're going to rotate to so they're going to do a different tool, different solution, have different people they're communicating, interacting with, because in 2 years, if they want to move on, or 3 years, they want to move on, that's great. But they're going to advocate on our behalf, saying, you know what, I went there and I got a foundational breadth of knowledge because I rotated through different functions and I learned so much more than just going to a job to do an engineering job. You know what I mean?
That's what you heard. That's what kind of what happened to you in the military.
Right.
That's, and I also have to say, side note, I guess cyber's got to get into that. It's an integrated capability. If I talk to one more cyber person who's like, I only do cyber for cloud, I'm like, man, it's all together now.
It is 100%.
So last question before we wrap up is kind of a question I love to ask all of our guests selfishly. How do you stay informed about what do you have a recommendation for us in the audience of, like, a podcast, a book, TED Talk? Yeah. What would you recommend we take a look at?
So I think for me, it's been the people I've associated myself with, because they bring different perspectives and I'm constantly learning. That's the easy way around this. There's a lot of groups that are out there, like ISACA, NIST. There's organizations that exist out there that you can get connected and plugged into that provide you real information, not what you find on Google or not what you find in social media. Like, there's a lot of noise out there that's not accurate. And I think knowing to go to the source of the information and actually getting that source information and then digesting it in the way that you can. So, the problem is now social media is overtaking everything, and people are so influenced by what other people post and put out there, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. And I think you've got to be able to separate from, that's my personal life, but my professional life is over here. And
also you create a baseline of, like, real information, right? You just create like, this is my foundation stone. And then you can go to Reddit and you can go to, like,
Yeah.
get all whatever the crazy opinions are of like, really
Yeah.
ramped up developers. But I totally agree. Like there's like great resources that are like, they're confirmed resources. They're the real answer. It's available for you. You know what I mean? I agree with that. And I love what you're saying too about talking to smart people. Because I feel like you're not just like, hey, tell me what you know, but creating those relationships, you can always kind of come back to the well over time.
Right. 100%. And if you're not learning, I mean, you have to be learning all the time, regardless what your role is, where you're at.
25% of your time, 75% communicating, 25% learning new stuff.
I learn a lot in communication because I learn things all the time when people talk to me that they just don't understand.
It's so valuable to like get that like sort of 75%. I'm sure you do other stuff, but it's really like people don't realize it's not as off the side of the desk thing,
it isn't. Yeah.
And it's easy to get into that, especially in cyber, because there's like a lot of things that could command your attention every day, right?
Yes.
It's hard to prioritize that stuff. So I'm really glad you talked about that and gave us some like specific tactics, but also it is really interesting to and surprising to hear how your military background has really supported your leadership journey. Journey. No, I don't want people to say journey, but your leadership experience.
Right.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Know that people are going to be really interested in hearing more about your unorthodox path.
I hope so. We'll see, but I really appreciate you taking time out to speak with me.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on BetterTech.
Thank you.